Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about subtracting negatives. All right, this is going to sound a little crazy and some of you are going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But it's actually a really cool concept. Before we dive in, I do want to give you a little bit of overview. This is one of those topics that gets a little bit confusing. So if you get lost, please pause, rewind, rewatch as much as you need, and then feel free to ask your peers and ask me questions if you have questions, okay? So, again, the video that we are watching right now is going to be called Subtracting Negatives. And our learning target is I can subtract numbers, okay? So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over and we are going to try and fill in our notes. All right, so subtracting blank means do the blank of negative. Okay, subtracting blank means do the blank of negative. I want you to go ahead and try pausing your video and give this a whirl. Pause your video and try and fill these in. Remember, each line is one letter. All right, here we go. So, subtracting negatives means to do the opposite of negative. All right, so if we are subtracting a negative, that means we're actually going to add a positive. Okay, so subtracting negative means add positive. So, here we go. Let's do this with some counters. So let's say, let's keep green negative. So green counters are negative, and let's say pink counters are positive. You can pick whatever colors you like. I'm going to stick with pluses and minuses because for me, it makes my life easy. So right now we need 2 positives, 1, 2. So first we need to say that we're going to have 2. We need to keep the number 2 the same. So to introduce 3, we have to start with introducing 0. We can't take away negative numbers if we have no negative numbers. So we're going to introduce 0. So how do we make a 0? We need to introduce negatives and positives. But we need to introduce that in 0 form. So if you recall our 0 pairs, we can have a -3 and a +3, and that's the same as 0. So we're going to introduce 3 positives and 3 negatives. And this is equal to 0, right? That's one big 0. But now we can take away 3 negatives. So if we take away 3 negatives now, we're left with just adding. So how many plus signs do we have? We have +5. But that's not how we write it. How do we write it? We just write it as regular 5. So the same way that we can write minus -3, we can also say just 2 plus 3. And it's kind of easy to remember because we have this parenthesis in here. I like to just kind of straighten that parenthesis out and extend those 2 negatives together. And it makes it look like a plus sign. Okay? So let's go over and try this one now. So over here, we'll keep the same green negatives. So this time we have 7 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it wants us to introduce -4. So if we're going to take away -4, we have to introduce one of our zero pairs again. This time it's a 4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, that's a zero pair. But we're going to take away 4 from our zero pair. But now I have positive and negative. If I move these positives down here, don't I create 4 more zero pairs? 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0. And what am I left with? I'm left with -3. So in this case, because my first number was negative, I can still turn this into my +4, but because I have a negative and a positive, it goes back to that adding opposites. Okay, so adding different signs. That's why we had to learn that first. Okay? All right. Jump down to our number line. So now we're down here using number lines. Write a real-world scenario for the fraction problem below and solve it on the number line. So you have to actually write your own real-world problem now. Remember, this is a word problem. You can make it as simple or as difficult as you want. Your only requirement is that you use these numbers given to you and then that you solve it on the number line. Now, this could be a little bit challenging, so let me give you a little bit of an example. If I was going to write a problem for this, I would probably say something like, I went camping, but to get to the campsite, I had to hike down to my campsite. I started at 2.5 miles below sea level, and then I needed to stop for a break. It was a long walk. So I stopped for some water, and then I hiked down another 5.5 miles below sea level to get to the campground. Show on the number line how far down I had to hike below sea level to get to the campground. Okay, so that's just one example of how I could write a real-world problem for this. I want you to write a real-world problem for this. It can be as difficult or as easy as you want, but take your time, make it fun. Go ahead and pause the video here and you try. All right, so once you've written your problem, then you should be able to solve it. And once you solve it, you should be able to get this as your answer. You should start at -2.5, and then you're going to subtract -5.5. So you're going to have to add 5.5 to your -2.5. Okay? Remember, -2.5, you're going to have to estimate where it is in between -2 and -3. All right, let's jump over to our using absolute value to solve this. Let's make this a decimal problem. I think that this should be a decimal problem. Let's show this as a decimal. So we're going to make this -5.2 plus minus -3.7. Okay? So I want to show this as a decimal problem. So we are going to say we're going to solve this using absolute value. So we have absolute value of -5.2 Okay? And that's going to equal just plain old 5.2. And then we have absolute value of negative 3.7. And that is going to equal 3.7. But there's that subtraction sign in the middle, so we're just going to subtract these. So we're going to say 5.2. Remember, we need to line up those decimals. Minus 3.7. You cannot take 7 from 2, so we have to borrow. That 2 becomes 12. 12 minus 7 is 5. And 4 minus 3 is 1. Remember, now we can bring down that decimal. And then we need to ask ourselves, which is bigger, 3.7 or 5.2? 5.2 is bigger. So inside of that absolute value, 5.2 is negative. So our answer is going to be negative. All right, let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see it. All right, I want you to go ahead and try this one. All right, so because subtracting negatives means do the opposite of negative, you take the minus negative and you just make one single plus. All right? So here we go. In your own words, summarize what happens when you subtract negative numbers. Okay? This is important for you to do. Make sure you do this. And until next time, have a good day. See you later. Love your faces.